because my biggest fear was that I was an imposter and somebody was going to find out. My biggest fear was somebody was going to question why I get to coach people. And then it actually happened, and then I had to go find the proof. And then from that day forward, I didn't have that level of imposter syndrome. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all of the time. I hope you enjoyed the last episode number 106, the 2 C's of social media. We talked about conversion versus conversation and the importance of understanding that for social media. Today, for episode number 107, dealing with imposter syndrome. So I was looking at the data, as I always talk about on the podcast, but I was looking at the data for this podcast. And I think I've done 2 episodes, maybe 2 or 3 episodes on mindset things. And those 2 episodes, 2 or 3, however many it is, have a lot of listens. So I figured, you know what? I haven't done an episode on mindset or anything involving the mindset recently. So let's do that. I know people, especially in the very beginning, deal with imposter syndrome. So maybe you're listening to this podcast because you want the inspiration, the motivation, the knowledge, tips, tools, tactics, courage to start your podcast. Awesome. Maybe you're listening to this podcast because you're early on and you want to grow, scale, monetize, all that happy jazz. No matter where we are, I think there is always an opportunity for imposter syndrome. So what is imposter syndrome? I think imposter syndrome is the feeling of the fear that people are going to recognize that we don't know as much as they think we know. And even the definition of that, you can kind of see how it doesn't really make sense. Because oftentimes, imposter syndrome is us being afraid that our deepest fear is going to be revealed. And sometimes that deepest fear is that I feel like I don't know that much. I feel like I'm going to get found out. I feel like this guest or this host is going to think I'm a fraud. I feel like I don't really know what I'm talking about, and people are going to find that out. I have dealt with imposter syndrome for this entire journey. I still get it occasionally, and I'm consistently working through it. So I've told this story many times on other podcasts and other coaching calls and whatever it may be. I don't know if I've ever told it here. Maybe I have. I was getting ready to go on a podcast one time, and I always do research before I join a podcast, before I'm going on as a guest, because it's good to know. I want to know how to pronounce the host's name, all of that stuff. And the host of this podcast was a doctor for NASA. So this person was a space doctor. And I had this moment where I was thinking to myself, there's no way I'm supposed to be on this show. There's no way this person wants to have me on. There's no way I'm going to be able to add any value to this show. There's no way. I didn't even go to college, and this person is a space doctor. I didn't even know that was a real thing. But what I said to myself was, all right, when's the last time you felt this way? Well, I went on a podcast earlier that week or the week prior where I was on with a doctor of psychology, and we were talking all about self-belief and self-worth and my journey and my story. And I had a very similar moment where I didn't think I was going to be able to add any value. So this is what's really helped me. I look for the 2 R's. I look for the most recent and relevant proof. The most recent proof was I was on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and the most relevant proof was I felt the same exact way as I feel today, and it went better than I expected. And maybe this time will go better than I expected. And it did. It went better than I expected. And then I ended up doing a free call with that person, and they changed a lot of their podcast logistics because of the conversation we have, and they rebranded, and I was able to add value to that person's life. So one interesting, important thing I think to speak on when it comes to imposter syndrome is I don't know if it's ever really going to go away. That's number one. And number two, I actually think imposter syndrome is a good thing because it suggests that you're growing. If you always feel like you're in 1,000% control of everything that you're doing, you're probably not growing that much, or you're really, really, really confident, depending. But I think the confident is the minority. I think it's the smaller segment of people. I think most of us deal with imposter syndrome in some way, shape, or form. So here's the thought. The question that I hear often is, who am I to start a podcast on blank? Who am I to not have a certification and coach people? Who am I to tell my story, and why does that matter? You don't have to know everything in coaching. You only really have to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of the person that you're helping. That's one thought. Second thought is, you don't have to have a podcast where you're teaching people things. You can have a podcast where you're having conversations and adding value. In the very beginning of this, I wasn't trying to teach people things. I was trying to have deep conversations because I didn't really know anything. At least I didn't think I knew anything. And then maybe I'd have my opinions of, okay, well, this is how you stay motivated or whatever, but I didn't really know what I was talking about. And then 100 episodes in, I didn't really know what I was talking about compared to 200 episodes in, compared to 300 episodes in. So you're not necessarily positioning yourself as the expert in the beginning. And if you are, that's fine. But if you have imposter syndrome around, well, who would listen to me when it comes to this? Just think of it as having deep conversations, and people will get their awareness raised by listening to those conversations. And who are you to tell your story? It's your story. Nobody in the world will ever have the same exact story in the same exact way that you do. Nobody will ever have it. You can't have the same exact story as I do, just like I can't have the same exact story as you do. So it's quite literally your job to tell your story. It's quite literally your responsibility. You deserve to. You deserve to tell your story because it's your story to tell. I think the understanding that imposter syndrome is good because it is growth is probably the thing that has helped me the most. I still get it. I spoke recently. You've heard me talk about it. I was talking about it a lot when I was in Toronto doing the speech for Evan Carmichael. But I had a minute where I was getting ready to fly out. This was the night before I left to go. And I started to see some of the people that were attending this mastermind. And they were all very, very, very successful people. And I had this moment where I said, I am such an imposter. These people are going to find me out. And I went and gave the speech, and it was amazing. And then I got offered another opportunity to speak to a larger group of humans, which is awesome. That's the goal. But I had that imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is probably going to get worse if you don't take action. If you don't have the recent and relevant proof, it's going to be really hard to actually take action and move forward. I'm grateful that I actually did the things that I was scared of because I got the recent and relevant proof, and the next time I had the opportunity to do it, I could look back on that. But imagine if I had an opportunity to do something, I didn't have the courage to do it, and then I have the opportunity to do something else that scares me, but I don't have the recent and relevant proof. This is something I've talked about a lot recently. Somebody asked me, how are you doing? What are you going through? What are you going through? And I said, I'm going through this weird time where when I get external results or external opportunities, it triggers internal things in me. And then when I face those internal things and I work on those internal things, it creates more external opportunities, and then it becomes this cycle. I think that's imposter syndrome in a nutshell. You get invited to go on a podcast, and you have imposter syndrome. I don't really know that I'm going to be able to add value on this podcast. You go do it, and it goes really well. And then you think to yourself, you know what? I don't know. I really enjoyed that. I think I'd love having my own podcast. But then you get imposter syndrome again. Well, who's going to listen to me? I don't know what I'm talking about. Who would ever come on this podcast? Who am I to tell my story? Why would anybody listen? But then you do that and you face that fear. Then it's, why would this guest ever come on this podcast? I'm a nobody. I'm small. I have no listens. But then guests start coming on. And then it becomes this cycle. Well, who would ever coach with me? I've never coached before. I don't have any certifications. Then you get your first client for free and you prove to yourself that you can do it. And it just continues to evolve and evolve and evolve and evolve. I don't have the magic bullet. I don't have the 3-step system to overcome imposter syndrome. I don't think either of those exist. I think we coexist with imposter syndrome. And I think this is where the courage hits the pavement. When I first started this podcast, I had imposter syndrome because I didn't feel like I was very good at doing a one-man solo podcast because I had done 1,500 at the time, episodes with a co-host. So this was the first time I had done solo episodes in 6 years or 5 years. That's a long time not to have done it. So I felt like an imposter. I felt like I'm speaking on podcasting and I'm speaking on the importance of speaking, and I'm struggling to get through these episodes because I haven't done them like this in so long. But I kept going and I kept going and I kept going, and I feel so much better now. I feel really good now. I feel really centered. I feel like I'm in my stride, and now I won't say it's easy, but it's easier than it's ever been. And then something else will happen. When I did my interview with Evan Carmichael for this channel, for this podcast, I had a little bit of imposter syndrome because I was thinking to myself, well, the audience is going to be listening to the questions that I ask, and I always talk about the importance of powerful questions. I really hope I do a good job. I had that fear, and then it went really well, and then I got other opportunities.
What's going on, guys? My name is Austin, and I've been working with Kevin for a few months now. If there's one thing that I find super valuable is his expertise on how to position the podcast to the right audience and fit the content into the overall business plan. And frankly, when we work together, he challenges me a lot. There were some tough conversations that he initiated with me so that I can really grow in the business. Besides the coaching part, the editing team does amazing work with editing and show notes and staying on top of all communications. Overall, my experience working with Kevin has really been top-notch.
So if you want imposter syndrome to go away, and this is going to be sad, but I want to make it funny, not just sad. If you want imposter syndrome to go away, just stop trying new stuff. And if you want imposter syndrome to go away, next time you get an opportunity that scares you, but you know you should do it, just don't do it. And you probably won't get imposter syndrome anymore. But you definitely won't get fulfillment. You definitely won't get the level of success you're aspiring towards, the level of impact you're aspiring towards, the level of skills you're trying to develop. You probably won't get any of that either. I think imposter syndrome is just one of those things. I'm still afraid of rejection. I'm just afraid of rejection less than I used to be. I don't personalize it as much. I'm still afraid of bombing a speech, but I'm just not as afraid as I used to be because I have proof that it's probably going to go better than I think. And then I get really kind words from people, and it resonated. Awesome. Even if I didn't feel like I did great, I get a lot of compliments. All right, that's something. And that becomes proof. So if you're dealing with imposter syndrome, you have to find the proof that goes against the fact that you think you're an imposter. Last thing I'll add. It'll be a shorter episode today, but again, I'll find a way to stretch this out another 8 minutes to make it 20 minutes, as always, probably. When I was early in coaching, mindset coaching, peak performance coaching, self-awareness coaching, whatever you want to call it, life coaching, I guess, for lack of better phrasing, I had somebody reach out to me, and they DM'd me on Instagram, and this was my greatest fear at the time. They said, I don't mean any negativity by this. I don't mean any negativity. I'm not trying to bring you down. I'm not trying to start an argument. I'm just genuinely curious. What gives you the right to coach other people? Why do you get to coach other people? And I remember getting that message, and I was initially triggered. It was like, oh my goodness, this person found out. They found me out. And then I sat with it. And then I started formulating a response. I said, no, I appreciate the question. I appreciate the question very much, because I did. I said, at this point, I have done, let's say it was 300 podcast episodes. I've been studying self-improvement every single day now for the last however many years. My life is built around deep conversations. My podcast is all about self-improvement. I'm tracking habits and reading books and learning every single day behind the scenes, so I'm very peak performing. I live this. Yeah, I live a life filled with self-improvement, so I feel like I can help somebody who's newer when it comes to self-improvement. And the person said, thank you so much for that. I think that's a really great answer, and thank you for answering. That was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because my biggest fear was that I was an imposter and somebody was going to find out. My biggest fear was somebody was going to question why I get to coach people. And then it actually happened, and then I had to go find the proof. And then from that day forward, I didn't have that level of imposter syndrome. I didn't really have it because I had already answered the questions that I was afraid I was going to get asked. The same thing could happen with podcast coaching. Kev, why do you get to have and I'm not at this stage. I have very little imposter syndrome when it comes to the podcast and the podcast coaching just because I've been doing it for so long. But Kev, why do you get to have a podcast about podcasts? Well, I don't know. Between all the shows and the episodes and the guest spots and the hosting I've done, I'm at 2,200 episodes. We've been able to turn our podcast into a $1 million business, which I know is so incredibly rare. We've been able to turn our podcast into something that's been heard over 1 million times in 170 plus countries. That's something that's so rare. I've just had more success than a lot of other people have had, and I understand how we got it. And I can teach other people that. That's all it is. But I have been on so many podcasts where when people introduce me, they say he's got 1,700 episodes and blah, 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 blah. And that's locked in at this point. If anything, people probably think I'm better than I actually am. And I don't really mean that, but when you get that kind of introduction, it's like maybe it seems like I don't have problems, and maybe it seems like our podcast doesn't have problems and we don't make mistakes, but we're always learning and we're always growing and we're always messing stuff up. I mess up on this podcast every week. It's just a matter of whether or not you notice it. But I'm always misspeaking and not having the right word that I want to use. But I think it comes with time. My first clients when I was working with podcasters, I felt like an imposter for sure because I didn't know what I knew. And sometimes you have to talk to somebody to figure out how much you actually know. That's one of the best things ever. If you feel like an imposter when it comes to coaching, whatever you're coaching on, go talk to somebody who's at the very beginning of the journey and see the things that are just blatantly obvious to you that don't make any sense to somebody in the beginning. I've been a bodybuilder for 17 years now, 18 years, long time. And at least I've been exercising. I haven't always considered myself a bodybuilder. But I saw a piece of content today that got a ton of engagement and it was super helpful for a lot of people that in my mind is just common sense. If you're weighing your food, so if you're tracking your calories and your macros, you weigh out your food to figure out how many calories and the macros that you're eating. And what you can do is you can put something on the scale, your food scale, like a jar of peanut butter, take the top off, put the jar of peanut butter on the scale, and then hit 0, and it'll zero it out. And then any food you take from the jar will be a negative measurement. So it'll say -5 grams, -10 grams, -15, right? And I don't know what the serving size is. Is it 38 grams or something? I don't know. But it's easier than scooping peanut butter out and then putting it back on the scale to see, okay, that scoop was this amount, that scoop was this amount. It's easier if you just do the minus. And again, don't worry if that doesn't make sense. But for me, that is so common sense. But it probably wasn't common sense 16 years ago when I started. So that's one of the best ways that has also helped me overcome imposter syndrome is talk to people that are very, very new in what you're doing. And you're going to realize you probably know a heck of a lot more than you are giving yourself credit for. Okay? So a couple takeaways. This will be the TLDL, too long, didn't listen. Maybe I'll start doing these. The TLDL, too long, didn't listen. Imposter syndrome is, to me at least, a suggestion of growth and a positive thing, not a negative thing. I don't know if we're ever going to overcome it. I think we coexist and we just continue to coexist better and build a more positive relationship. Look at the most recent and relevant proof when it comes to the last time you felt like an imposter and how that went. And list out, if you were to play devil's advocate, give me a list of all the reasons you're not an imposter. Give me that list, because that list might be very, very empowering. Now, here's the truth. You might also kind of be an imposter, but that's okay. Nobody gets to tell you whether or not you're able to do something. In the very beginning, I kind of was an imposter when it came to self-improvement. But I tried to be, and I probably wasn't as much as I am today, but I tried to be as humble and as curious as I can be. If you're humble with your growth, if you're curious with your growth, if you're honest with your growth, if you're self-aware when it comes to your growth, it's okay to be an imposter. All an imposter means is you're probably new to something and you don't know as much as you want to know. And I think that's kind of the experience of life anyway. So if you're dealing with imposter syndrome, it's totally normal. Don't stop because you're feeling it. I think if anything, imposter syndrome is a suggestion that you should keep on going. Boom. If you feel like an imposter and you want to work through it, maybe you feel like an imposter as a coach. Maybe you feel like an imposter as a first-time business owner because you're really treating your podcast like a business. Whatever it is, click the link in the show notes for a free 30-minute call, and I will do everything I can to add value. I did the speech that I spoke about recently. It was a virtual one on the 4th of July, and I think it was to 50 people. And I had a QR code at the end, and I said, the call is totally free. I hope every single one of you books. I just want to add value. And I'm pretty sure 9 or 10 people booked free calls, and they have been amazing. They have been amazing. One of the calls I had the other day was somebody who was trying to put all of the stuff that they do in the right order and brand it accordingly. And they left that call with so much clarity, and now they have a really good starting line. They understand where they're starting from. So again, I'm not going to sell you on anything. I don't care if we ever work together. I genuinely want to add value. And my goal is to do these for as long as humanly possible. I want to be able to do them forever. That's the goal. Will that happen? I don't know. But be courageous. Get outside of your comfort zone. And I promise I'm the same behind the scenes as I am in front of the camera. If not, weirder. So the link will be in the show notes. I hope for you that you're feeling like less of an imposter. I hope that if it's the summer season for you, you're not skipping episodes. Don't skip episodes. Don't regret skipping episodes. I know it's nice out. I know you want to travel. Bring your mic with you. If you don't have your mic, use your wired headphones like I'm showing on camera right now. Use your iPhone. Just don't miss an episode. Don't miss. Consistency is the name of the game, and the more consistent you are, the better you're going to get. So I hope for you that you're being consistent, and I hope that people are self-identifying. I hope people are joining a Facebook group or joining your email list or messaging you saying, hey, that was a powerful episode, leaving reviews, subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube and or the podcast platform that you're listening on, and leave a review if you would. I'd appreciate it very much. Got to do that shout out because if I'm going to talk about it, I got to do it. And that's that. So keep on podcasting, keep on crushing it, and until next week, that's that. We'll talk to you then.